The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Our story starts in the summer of 1860 in the busy city of Baltimore. At that time, babies were usually born at home, not in hospitals. But young Mr. and Mrs. Roger Button had different ideas. They wanted their first baby to arrive in a hospital. Was this one of the reasons for the strange history that I'm going to tell you? I can only describe what happened. Then you can decide. The Roger Buttons were important people in Baltimore society. They knew every good family in town, and everyone knew them. This was their first baby, so Mr. Button was naturally nervous. He was hoping for a boy so he could send him to Yale College in Connecticut. Mr. Roger Button was a student at Yale when he was a young man. Of course, he wanted his son to follow him there. The great day arrived. Mr. Button hurried to the hospital one morning in September for the news of his wife and baby. When he was close to the Maryland private hospital, he saw the family doctor on the front steps. There was a serious look on the doctor's face, and this worried Mr. Button. He ran toward the doctor. "Dr. Keene," he called. "Oh, Dr. Keene." The doctor heard him and turned around. He saw Mr. Button, and a curious look came over his face. "What happened?" asked Mr. Button. "What was it? How is she? A boy? What?" "Talk sense," the doctor said a little angrily. "Is the child born?" asked Mr. Button. Dr. Keene didn't answer immediately. "Yes," he said slowly. "A strange birth." "Is my wife all right?" "Yes." "Is it a boy or a girl?" "Go and see," replied Dr. Keene. He still seemed strangely angry. "Terrible. One more case like this will finish me in medicine." "What's the matter? Is there a problem with the baby?" asked Mr. Button. "Go and see them," said Dr. Keene, "and then get yourself another doctor. I brought you into the world, young man, and I've looked after your family for 40 years, but this is the end. I don't want to see you or any of your relatives ever again. Goodbye." And without another word, he turned and walked away. Mr. Button stood there on the sidewalk, feeling very worried and afraid. Something terrible has happened, he thought. Now, he didn't want to go into the hospital. But he walked slowly up the steps and through the entrance door. A nurse was sitting behind a desk. "Good morning," she smiled. "Good morning. I'm Mr. Roger Button." A look of fear came over the girl's face. She stood up, clearly planning to run away. Then she calmed herself and sat down. "I want to see my child," said Mr. Button. The nurse gave a little scream. "Ah, of course. Upstairs, go upstairs," she said quickly. She pointed to the stairs, and Mr. Button turned away from the desk. He went upstairs and found another nurse. She was carrying a large metal bowl. "I'm Mr. Button," he began nervously. "I want to see my—" Clank! The nurse dropped the bowl. It fell down the stairs, one step at a time, and landed with a loud noise at the bottom. "I want to see my child," Mr. Button shouted. "All right, Mr. Button," the nurse agreed in a quiet voice. "All right. But it's terrible. We're all feeling, well, nobody will want to use the hospital again after this." "Hurry," Mr. Button cried. "I can't wait any longer." "Come this way, Mr. Button." Mr. Button followed the nurse. There was a sound of babies crying. This grew louder until they stopped outside a room. The nurse pushed the door open and they went in. Around the walls were white cribs, each one with a name tied to the top. "Well," said Mr. Button, "which is mine?" "There," said the nurse. Mr. Button's eyes followed her pointing finger. And this is what he saw. An old man of about 70 years old sat in one of the cribs. His hair was almost white, and he had a long gray beard. His feet hung over one end of the crib, and his head and arms hung over the other. He was wearing only a large white blanket. He looked at Mr. Button with a question in his eyes. "Am I crazy?" Mr. Button shouted angrily at the. "Is this some terrible hospital joke?" "Doesn't seem like a joke to us," said the nurse angrily. "And I don't know if you're crazy or not, but there's no mistake. That is your child." The old man looked calmly at the nurse and then at Mr. Button. "Are you my father?" he asked. "Because if you are, please get me out of this place. It's very uncomfortable." "Where did you come from? Who are you?" screamed Mr. Button. "I can't say exactly who I am," the old man replied. "I was only born a few hours ago, but I know my last name is Button." "You're lying. I don't believe you." The old man turned to the nurse. "That's a nice way to welcome a new baby," he said. "Please tell him he's wrong." "You're wrong, Mr. Button," said the nurse coldly. "This is your child, and you'll have to make the best of it. We want you to take him home as soon as possible, sometime today." "Home?" said Mr. Button. "Take him home?" "Yes, we can't have him here." "I'll be glad to get home," said the old man. "I can't sleep because of all the crying in here, and I asked for something to eat, and they brought me a bottle of milk." Mr. Button sat on a seat next to his son and put his head in his hands. "What will people say? What must I do?" he said to himself quietly. "You'll have to take him home," said the nurse, "immediately." Mr. Button suddenly imagined himself walking through the town with an old man at his side. What could he say to people? "This is my son, born early this morning." He thought of those people looking in surprise at the old man next to him. The nurse was watching him impatiently. "Don't sit there feeling sorry for yourself," she said. "I'm not going to walk home in this blanket," said the old man suddenly. "Babies always have blankets," replied the nurse. "Well, this baby's not going to wear this blanket any longer. In a few minutes, I'm going to take it off." Keep it on," said Mr. Button hurriedly. He turned to the nurse. "What shall I do?" "Go to town and buy your son some clothes," the nurse told him. As Mr. Button left the room, his son called to him. "And a hat, father. I want a hat. Maybe I need some glasses, too." Mr. Button shut the door hard behind him, and all the babies started crying again. He went to the nearest clothes store. "I want to buy some clothes for my son," he said to the sales clerk. "How old is your son, sir?" "About 6 hours old," answered Mr. Button without thinking. "Baby's clothes are in the back of the store. I don't think he's an unusually large child, very large." "They'll have the largest baby sizes." "Where are the boys' clothes?" asked Mr. Button. He felt nervous. He was sure the sales clerk already knew his terrible secret. "Boys' clothes are right here." Mr. Button stopped and thought for a minute. He didn't like the idea of dressing his son in men's clothes. Maybe a very large boy's suit. Then he could cut his son's beard off and color his hair brown. He looked around, but he couldn't see anything to fit the newborn Button. "How old did you say your son was?" asked the sales clerk curiously. He's 16. "I'm so sorry. I thought you said 6 hours. You'll find something for the young man in the next room." Mr. Button turned away, then he stopped and pointed his finger at a suit in the shop window. "There," he said, "I'll take that suit." The sales clerk looked at the suit in surprise. "But that's for a child to wear to a party, sir. It's not for everyday wear. It's a costume." "That's what I want." The surprised sales clerk sold him the costume. Back at the hospital, Mr. Button threw the package at his son. "Here are your clothes," he said. "Put them on." The old man untied the package and looked at the suit. "I don't want to look stupid," he said. "I'm the one who looks stupid," said Mr. Button angrily. "Put them on, or I'll hit you." That sounded strange. But wasn't it what fathers said to their sons? All right, father, you've lived longer than me. You know best. I'll do what you want. And hurry. I'm hurrying, father. When his son was dressed, Mr. Button looked at him unhappily. It wasn't good. The pants were pink, the socks were green, and the white shirt had a belt around the waist. Hanging down over the front of the shirt was his son's long gray beard. Wait, he said. Mr. Button picked up a hospital knife and cut off most of the beard. But even this didn't help much. The watery eyes, the yellow teeth, you could see that this was an old man. But Mr. Button held out his hand. Come along, he said. His son took his hand and they walked together from the hospital. What are you going to call me, father? Baby, until you think of something better? The old man asked. I don't know, said Mr. Button coldly. I think we'll call you Methuselah. Mr. and Mrs. Roger Button didn't call their baby Methuselah. They called him Benjamin. They cut his hair short and colored it brown. They shaved his beard every day, and they ordered very large baby suits for him. They wanted Benjamin to look like a baby, and they tried very hard. But the baby nurse took one look and left the house immediately. At first, on Mr. Button's orders, his son was only given warm milk. But this didn't please Benjamin, so Mr. Button finally changed his mind. After that, Benjamin was given bread and butter and other soft food. Mr. Button brought home toys for babies, and Benjamin tried to play with them. But the toy trains and animals didn't interest him. Soon, he focused on other things in the house that he liked better. One day, when Mr. Button came home, his cigarettes weren't in their usual place. He looked everywhere. Later that evening, he walked into his son's bedroom. The room was full of smoke, and Benjamin was trying to hide a cigarette. Mr. Button was very angry. He knew that he should punish his son, but he found that he couldn't hit him. You won't grow old, he told Benjamin. Smoking is very bad for children. He continued to bring home toys, but Benjamin wasn't interested. When he was alone in the house, he often took books from the shelves downstairs. Then he read them all afternoon in his room. His toys stayed in a corner of the room, and he never played with them. Soon, everybody in Baltimore knew about Benjamin. Most people didn't know what to say to Mr. and Mrs. Button. He looks very much like his grandfather, some kind people said. This, of course, was true, but Mr. and Mrs. Button weren't pleased, and Benjamin's grandfather was very angry. Small children were brought to the house to play with Benjamin. He tried to be interested in their games, but it wasn't easy for him. Their games were very simple baby games, and Benjamin wanted more difficult activities. One day, he broke a kitchen window with a stone when he was playing with some of the children. It was an accident, but the boys were all afraid. But Mr. Button wasn't angry. Secretly, he was very pleased. Accidents happen when small boys are playing, he told his wife. You see, Benjamin is only a child like every other small boy. After this success, Benjamin tried to break something every day to please his parents. After a difficult start, Benjamin and his grandfather became very good friends. They sat together for hours talking about news from the town or stories in the newspapers. Benjamin started to feel more comfortable with his grandfather than with his parents. Mr. and Mrs. Roger Button always seemed a little afraid of their son. They told him what to do, but they often called him Mr. Benjamin was as surprised as everyone by the age of his mind and body. He didn't understand it. He read books about medicine, but he never found another case like his. Because Mr. Roger Button wanted him to play with other boys, Benjamin tried to do this, but he couldn't run with them, and football was too hard for him. His body was too old. He was afraid of getting hurt. The other boys couldn't understand Benjamin. They didn't know his age. They thought he was an old man. It seemed strange to play games with him. When he was 5, Benjamin was sent to kindergarten. There he learned to stick pieces of colored paper together. He made things from old boxes, and he drew pictures. But he was bored, and he often went to sleep in class. His teacher was worried by this. She wrote to his parents, and soon Benjamin was taken out of school. The Buttons explained this to their friends. "We think he's still too young for school," they said. By the time he was 12 years old, his parents were used to him. Most of the time, they didn't think he was different from other children. Then, one day, Benjamin looked at the mirror and discovered something very surprising. My hair, he thought. It was white under the brown color, but now looks gray. And my skin seems smoother and healthier. Can it be true? Is it possible? He went to his father. "I'm grown up," he said. "I want to wear long pants." His father thought about it. "Well," he said finally, "I don't know. 14 is the usual age for putting on long pants. You're only 12. "But you must agree that I'm big for my age," said Benjamin. "Oh, I'm not sure about that," said Mr. Button. "I was as big as you when I was 12. This wasn't true, but Mr. Button wanted to believe it. He wanted nothing more than an ordinary son. Finally, Benjamin's parents agreed to his request. "But you must continue coloring your hair," said Mr. Button, "and you must try harder to play with the boys of your own age." "Yes, father." "And there's one more thing, Benjamin. You mustn't wear your glasses in the street." "No, father." "Then I will buy you a suit with long pants," said Mr. Button. Benjamin was very happy. The years passed. Benjamin became younger as he grew older. When he was 18, he looked like a man of 50. He had more hair and it was a dark gray. His voice was deeper and stronger. So his father sent him to Connecticut to take the entrance exam for Yale College. Benjamin passed all the tests and became a freshman. 3 years later, he received a letter from Mr. Hart, one of the professors. "Please come to see me today," the letter said. "We must discuss the times of your classes." Benjamin looked in the mirror. His hair needed more brown color, but he didn't have time to go to the store. He had to go to Mr. Hart as he was. "Good morning," said Mr. Hart politely. "You've come to discuss your son?" "Well, my name's Button," began Benjamin. "I'm very glad to meet you, Mr. Button. I've asked Benjamin to see me today. He'll probably be here soon." "That's me," said Benjamin quickly. "I'm a freshman." "What?" "I'm a freshman." "You're joking, of course." "No, I'm Benjamin Button." Mr. Hart looked at the information on his desk. "Mr. Benjamin Button's age is, I believe, 18. "That's my age," said Benjamin. Mr. Hart looked at him. "You surely don't think I believe that?" Benjamin smiled. "I'm 18, he repeated. Mr. Hart pointed to the door. "Get out," he said. "Get out of this college and out of town. You are a crazy, dangerous man." "I'm 18. Mr. Hart opened the door. "That's terrible," he shouted. "A man of your age trying to come here as a freshman. 18 years old, are you? Well, I'll give you 18 minutes to get out of town." Benjamin walked slowly out of the room. Some students were waiting outside and they watched him curiously. Benjamin turned around and faced Mr. Hart again. "I'm 18 years old," he repeated. The group of students laughed. Benjamin walked away. Benjamin started to walk back to the railroad station, but the students outside Mr. Hart's room were telling other students about the crazy man. Soon everyone in Yale knew the story. Benjamin started to realize that people were following him. At first, there were only 2 or 3 people. Then more joined the group. Soon, there were a lot of students behind him, and the college football team came too. They were all laughing and shouting at Benjamin. He thought the college was an old people's home. He's a really good student for his age. Go to Harvard. Benjamin walked faster, and soon he was running. When he was safely on the train for Baltimore, he put his head out of the window. "I will go to Harvard," he shouted at them. "You'll be sorry for this one day." "Ha ha ha ha," laughed the students. Benjamin learned an important lesson that day. Sometimes it was better not to be completely honest. But it was also the biggest mistake that Yale College ever made. And we'll read part 2 in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. I love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.